Hey everyone, Duke Nougat 3D here with another video for you guys, and today I wanted to talk about my experiences with making reproduction flapper valves for World War I gas masks. If you've watched my RFK restoration video series, you will probably remember that I had my hand at making reproduction flapper valves. I've seen a decent amount of repros on the market, and none of which that I've noticed seem to get the general shape, size, and look quite right. And so I decided to go ahead and try the project from scratch. In this video, I'm just going to be discussing my experiences with the project, what I've learned, what pretty much is preventing me from mass producing these and selling these at the current moment, so on and so forth. So first off the bat, I was very lucky to work with a couple people. I worked with my best friend Moulage and another collector slash salesman. I'm not going to name him, but anyhow, we worked together, and I pretty much pinpointed the exact dimensions of the valve itself. And the plan was originally to take those dimensions and use a template to dip mold the rubber, liquid rubber into, and basically it would cure on that form, and it would be able to be removed and or cut free from the template, and then just, but I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I'd like to show off this is an original flapper valve. This is, or at least most of one. This is, I believe, off of an M1 service mask, probably an M1A1 or M1A2. This is not entirely like the ones I had in World War I. It is the same size and shape. However, I do believe World War I examples were glued sheet rubber instead of slush molded, such as this example. As you can see, it is not the full length of the valve. It is it had been rotten off the original mask this came from, and I trimmed away the rotted sections so it would not progress any further. So I do have a physical example to copy off of. And as you can see here, like I said, this is completely molded rubber. This is not glued sheet rubber. So these are this is obviously a post-war one, but for the sake of longevity of the reproductions, I decided to go with reproducing molded rubber ones. The thickness of the rubber is evenly consistent throughout the entirety of the valve itself. There is several things that I ran into when doing the dip molding process. This is the first valve that I actually pulled off using a cardboard template. And the thing I learned about using cardboard templates is that the composition of the liquid rubber will tend to break up the cardboard, and it will stick to the cured rubber. And then if it has any ink on it, like the template I use with this example, any ink will imprint itself into the final cured rubber itself. And if you could sort of see on camera, I used actually a template made from a Captain Crunch cereal box, and the face of Captain Crunch is forever impermeated into the cured rubber there. So I aptly named this first semi-successful test valve the Captain Crunch valve. Here's another example of a valve that didn't quite go right. There's just so many complications in making these valves with the dip molding method. As you can see, if it's not fully done curing, it will run like this. Basically, there is a good chance that you could pull this off of a template and it is not fully done curing, and so it will get deformed and so on and so forth. The other side of it doesn't look too bad, but another thing to note is another problem with the dip molding is that there are so many inconsistencies in the finish of the rubber. You'll end up with lumps and thinner and thicker spaces, and not only that, but it wants to run as it cures. I got more success using plastic templates, such as this one here. This is actually one of the dipping templates that I used for making repros. This line section here was basically where to cut off the valve. This would be like the full length of a valve to install on a mask, and this would be just the excess so I can hang this up to dry, and that was the plan with that. The plastic templates did not have the same problems as the cardboard, where fibers would get cured onto the rubber or ink would imprint itself into the rubber. However, these plastic forms took a considerably longer amount of time to dry due to the fact that the ammonia preservative in the liquid rubber did not have it did not evaporate as well, whereas the cardboard would soak up most of that ammonia. This would just kind of trap it inside, and it would have to evaporate through some other means. So that was a bit of a hassle getting these plastic forms to work correctly. And here are a few examples of finished flapper valves that I've gone ahead and produced, and these are, as you can see, these are all very inconsistent in their finish. A couple of which even have been re-dipped in some areas just because the actual finished product is way too thin and needed reinforcing, or there are some areas where it tore after removing it, especially this one. This is a good example right here. You can see where it has been re-dipped in certain areas after releasing from the initial form. So yeah, dip molding these was not the way to go. And an interesting thing to note, I'd actually come across a document, a World War I, or I think it was actually post-war. It was from a catalog called The India Rubber World, and I believe it was dated 1919. And it pretty much goes throughout the entire progression of U.S. respirator development during the First World War. And they did the section they did on flapper valves. I was very fascinated to read that they were facing a lot of the same problems that I had. Most notably, the fact that when casting the flapper valves, the edges would be considerably thinner than the rest of the valve, and therefore the valve would be weak and prone to failure. And I think they mentioned at least more than half of the valves that they produced initially had to be thrown out because the results were just way too inconsistent and they couldn't really use them. They were most of the ones they produced were defective from production runs. So that's a little bit heartening to know that, you know, even back then, I'm not just a moron who doesn't know what he's doing. They didn't know what they were doing back then either, and they had a lot of problems getting these right, and these were one of the more difficult things to produce for the masks at the time. But anyhow, yeah, that's the main reason I'm not mass producing these. What I need to do now is I need to develop a slush mold. Instead of using templates like this to dip into, I'm thinking of creating or developing a 3-part mold with a central inner template, basically like one of these, but then there are 2 outer casing walls that surround that will make up just enough thickness to be similar to this original valve, and the rubber will simply be poured in and it'll allow it to cure that way, so that way when it is freed from the mold it will be evenly consistent all throughout the valve. There will be no thin spots, no runs, no drips, no anything. And currently I'm not at a point to, well, I could be, but most of my focus is not into that right now. I do hope to be in the future. At the very latest, I'm waiting until I can actively visit Moulage some more so we can work that out. But yeah, basically I'm kind of at a standstill with this project, and I do hope to pick it up again sometime in the future, but right now it is not very feasible due to the limitations in materials and resources that I have to produce these, and mass production doing the dip molded method is not feasible. As you can see, these are like the only ones left that I have that are somewhat usable, and they're just very inconsistent. Most of them are very weak and very thin walled along the edges, and I don't see these lasting very long. And so yeah, that's basically the issue with that. And I guess just to show off here, this is a good example of one that turned out somewhat okay. On my RFK here, you can see plenty of inconsistencies in the finish, but otherwise it looks half decent, and these do work and they do look the part, but obviously there's just too many inconsistencies and just problems with the structural integrity for them to be really, again, feasible for mass production. So that's basically that. I hope that gave you a little bit of insight with what I'm working with here, and if you have any tips or comments, please feel free to let me know about them. Again, I'm currently looking towards making a slush mold for these valves in the future, but nothing I'm really looking into right now. But anyhow, that's about it. I'm Duke New with 3D. If you have any comments, questions, corrections, or concerns, drop them in the comments below, and I will see you all later.